This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, I'm super jazzed for you to listen to this geek out session that I had with Wendy Wallbridge. I think there's going to be a ton of things that you're going to want to listen to again. You're going to want to write down. You're going to want to probably pause and think about. There's just such richness in our conversation. Wendy has just got an amazing, amazing background. She's the award-winning author of a book called Spiraling Upward that we talk a lot about and you're going to want to go get. She is TEDx Talk. She has done work with all kinds of organizations. She's been profiled by Fortune and the New York Times. And she is all about primarily working with women, but she does a lot of work with men too. And this is a human conversation, regardless of your gender, of really how do we get out of our own way. And she talks about how we move from living a life of default, where we are just kind of subject to our life, to moving to an inspired life. And she talks about what the spiral is a symbol of and how do we navigate the turns of the spiral. How do we make these co-created changes? How do we activate our agencies? Just a lot of really good nuggets for you as an individual person that you can use in your professional life. I just think it's such a great way. This is coming out right before Valentine's Day, so it's such a gift of love that you can give for yourself to apply these principles and level up and spiral up your life. Take a listen. Wendy, I am so looking forward to this geek out session with you today.
Wow. Me too. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Well, and when we first met, there is so much synergy in our work, which is one of the reasons that I'm excited that I know that's why I say it's going to be a geek out session. But I think more importantly, I feel like this is going to be such a timely conversation and really level setting our messy humanness. And there's just a lot of messiness going on right now. So I think it's going to be very timely.
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Well, so I want to dive right in. And while your work is geared primarily towards women, you are very clear about saying this is not a conversation just for women. It is for everyone. And in fact, in the revised edition of your Spiraling Up book, which we'll get to, you have a chapter of Spiraling Up for dudes, which I love, and you have men in your program too. So make no mistake, listeners, this is a conversation for humanness. And so I want to put that out there. So let's just go there. Your book is called Spiraling Up. Your work is called Spiraling Up. What do you mean, first and foremost, by spiraling up? And why do we need to do the work to spiral up in our lives?
Yeah, wow. Well, I thank you for that. That's a great question. So the spiral represents in many indigenous cultures and across the universe, really, transformation. The spiral is a symbol for transformation. And it kind of makes sense when you think about the spiral as a symbol for transformation, because it's often the process that I'm working with people on is having them let go of what is old and to step forward into what is new. And to be in this ever evolving thing is life. It's the growth mindset. So if you have any kind of point of view that life is anything but here for us to grow, then you're probably wrong, because that's really what life is about. It's not about getting anywhere. It's not about a destination. It's really not about achievement, even though that's important. It's really about the growth that we need to have. And so the spiral really represents, in the book, there's 3 levels of the spiral, and it takes people from what we call life by default, where we're kind of repeating the same lessons with different players. And then we kind of wake up and we go, either we have a divine discontent experience where we're like, I'm just not happy, I don't know why. Or we have something happen, like I call them the ows or the ahs. And they could be ow experiences, like where we get a diagnosis or we don't get the job we want, or we have a breakup. Or it could be an awe experience where something amazing happens but in both cases, it lifts us up to this next level of wanting to not get somewhere, but to be someone. And that's really the process of the initiation that people go through when they begin to really evolve themselves.
Oh my God, I could go deep in all of that in so many directions, but I love that. And I had a question I was going to ask you. We're going to talk more about those three turnings and the spiraling, but I love that you share that because I think so often, we are going on life on default. I mean, you talk about this in your book. We all are. Our brains are programmed that way. We are, depending on the research, but on average, most neuroscientists estimate we are on autopilot 90% of the time, right? We can't be at high alert all the time. But if we don't recognize that we are in that default autopilot mode, that we just kind of we keep repeating the same patterns. And a lot of times those patterns, it's like that, what's the quote? I don't know if Einstein actually said it, but everyone attributes it to him is the insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result or a different outcome.
Yeah, and here's an even added bonus on that, which is that, people want to, like you're saying, there's a part of us that wants to go on automatic because it's more efficient and it's nice to be at ease rather than constantly on alert. But also the body rewards us for taking risks and excitement. So it's when we're out on the skinny branches of our lives where we're taking a little bit of a risk and we're moving towards the thing that calls to us, even if it scares us, that the body rewards with a dopamine. And I love the quote by Pema Chodron, which goes, "To be fully alive, fully human, and completely awake is to be continually thrown out of the nest. To live fully is to be always in no man's land, to experience each moment as completely new and fresh." So it's hard to do, but it goes against human nature.
Oh yeah, 100%. And we talk about this in our work a lot. And actually we have research, I think I mentioned to you, that we're launching at the end of this month. And it's based on that human nature that we all have of sitting in familiarity, sitting in comfort, and it's the antithesis of our growth. And it's the antithesis of that growth happens outside your comfort zone. And the more disruptive the world around us gets, the more those biological innate instincts that are designed to protect us, we're on high alert for threat. And you talk about this in your book as well. And getting out of our comfort zone is threatening. A disruptive world is threatening. A change in our economy, a change in our government, a change in our leadership, a change in our organization, fill in the blank, change activates those threat responses more than we actually realize. And then we behave in all kinds of unproductive ways, many times unintentionally. I usually say, I'm an optimist, but I say I believe that most people, there's always exceptions, but I think most people aren't intentionally waking up every day saying, I'm going to be a butthead and I'm going to be difficult today. But something gets activated in that subconscious wiring, that autopilot, that has us in a threat response that is the antithesis of everything we want to be, the person we want to be in our world, that we need to thrive, that we need to grow. And so there's a lot, I think, like your spiraling up process is kind of how do we help people move through that? And we call it the upgrade. Like, how do we upgrade our inner programming to get off of, 1.0 and move to 4.0, so to speak? So, because if we don't do that upgrade, it doesn't work.
From surviving to thriving. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So with that, we're gonna go right there, and I have to say that for those of you that are listening, before we sign on, I showed Wendy the book, and I'm a dork, and I read like I cannot do audiobooks because I want to hold. I can't even do like Kindle. I want to hold the book in my hand, and I tab it and I highlight it. And Wendy's book, y'all, is highlighted and tabbed all over the place. So let me just say, you need to get it, and we'll have links in the show notes because I'm like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And what I love about your book, too, is not just that there's so much good content, but obviously I read through it more quickly because we were going to have this conversation, but I want to go back to it because it's not meant to be a read quick. It's meant to read and stop and think. And you have such thoughtful, reflective exercises at the end of every chapter. It's really meant to be a guide through the process. So everybody just plug, go get the book. Just telling you.
That's so great. Thank you. There is a lot there. And I would say, it's dense in that, and that not to expect yourself to do like a fast read like you had to, but to just savor it and open it anywhere, honestly, and you'll find stories that you can relate to as well as practices and exercises.
Yeah, a lot of the stories too, you're like, oh, it's shared humanity. I'm not alone. Oh, I'm not off my rocker. Oh, here we go.
That is I would say the point, because what I feel is happening for women in particular is, I've been working in a high tech company for 15 years, this one big one. And we've been doing this program with them over and over again. And the one thing that happens in that group that is always astounding and important is they say, I'm not alone. I'm not alone feeling these feelings that I have, which women have been isolated, so to speak, and not aware that the things that they're experiencing are so common. And it's a leveling. It's a great thing for people to read the stories and say, wow, it's really not so weird.
Yeah. It kind of calms the nervous system a little bit to say, oh, yeah, it's not just me. Okay. There's not something wrong with me. There's something wrong with our system, or just, we all have unconscious wiring, unconscious biases, whether we want to believe it or not. And just recognizing, oh, okay. Right.
And just to underline that even more, Rosie, the one thing that I would say women in particular need to hear and do have as a revelation, so sharing with your listeners, is this whole thing about not being enough. This whole thing about imposter syndrome, or that somehow there's something about you that you hold against yourself that you think somehow means that you're not quite as good as someone else. That is a universal core wound, I call it. And it's not personal. And it's really important for women, especially young women starting out, to realize that. Like, there's not enough credentials you could get to fix that thing. That's an inner job, and it's tussling with your own self-doubt to the point where you completely believe in the marrow of your bones that you're talented and good. And when you get there, no one can take that away from you. And that's a really important struggle to go through. And it's important to know that it's just not personal.
I'm so glad you said that for multiple reasons. And one, I will say that, I learned long ago in doing my own work and doing work with, hundreds and hundreds of leaders, is two things can be true at once. We can have polarities, and we can be enough just as we are, and at the same time be working to grow and be better. They're not an either or. And I think so often, you talk about this in your book, is that we end up in this scarcity mindset of the lacking, rather than, thinking like, oh, because I'm not there yet, or because I'm still on this journey. And it's that when I get to some far out destination, when I lose XYZ pounds, like to your point, when I get XYZ credential, then somehow I'm going to magically feel enough. But the problem is we don't ever get there unless we do the work to upgrade that operating system, or, you say, to spiral up.
You said it. That is so well said. Yeah. In the TED talk that I gave, the TEDx talk that I gave, I do a whole diagram of how we're inducted into this horizontal path to success, where we ticked off all the A's. I call it getting all A's: accolades, acquisitions, applause, all the things. And obviously that ends up not giving us fulfillment, even though we're told, oh, if I just get all those things and I do all this and I accomplish this, I'll get there. Luckily for us, there's also a vertical path with these interruptions that are unbidden, but also they are for our transformation. And they wake us up, like I said, it's the ahs and the ows, to this higher, I call it the VIP, our values, our inner strengths, and our purpose, that make us lift out of this tick-tock life that is just tick, 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 collecting all the things. It's not going to give it to us, and we've got to. So if you integrate the horizontal with the vertical in an upward motion, you get an upward spiral. It literally tacks between those two things. And the idea is that you're integrating your insights from these experiences into the direction of your life. And then you're going off-road, not the prescribed path that we've been told is the way to go, but rather our own unique spiral up path.
There's so much richness in that. And what brought that up for me, Wendy, is I think about, my own journey, and I'm open about sharing this in our book and our books, and I share this in keynotes as well. But I talk about, I grew up as the youngest of 5 girls in an overachieving family. So you talk about the accolades and the achievement. And I don't know that it was ever said to me, you need to do this, but you just kind of think, well, I better be like my sisters and I better be this. And it's just expected that I get A's. But there also were other things that were going on in our household and in our lives that I created that not enough narrative at a very young age for myself. And so it was well, if I can be frontline in my dance group, if I can be on the A honor roll, if I can be captain of dance, it's like if I can be the best at absolutely every freaking thing I get involved in, then somehow I'm going to feel enough. And here's the thing is that, and this is what I share with people, is to some extent, right, that mindset served me well. I mean, I did get good grades. I, got a lot of degrees. Like there's areas where that serves you to a point, but then it gets limiting because on more than one occasion for me, it has flat out led me to illness or injury. It has led me to burnout. At one point, it almost eroded my marriage because I'm running around trying to get accolades from people who, quite frankly, their opinions don't matter. And the people who matter the most to me were getting the crappy leftover version of me. And I know that I'm not alone. I know that so many people have it. But here's what I will say is I love that you focus on women, but I want to be really clear for the listeners because we're just wrapping up this research is this is pervasive in men too. In fact, what we call it the counterfeit programming, it's the fear of vulnerability and not being enough and sitting in comparison was the top faulty program that showed up in our research. 36% of the leaders in our database and the people we've worked with have what we call this counterfeit programming, and it's male and female across the board. So I think that more people have it than we realize. I think that shows up differently and that in many cases men overcompensate for that in a different way perhaps than women, but that underlying programming, make no mistake, regardless of gender, is really pervasive and common.
It is. And I think it has to do with the patriarchy because the suffering that is created for people through the patriarchy is different for men and women. But for men, they've downloaded that they have a limited ability to use all of the humanness of them. They don't get to develop all of their qualities. Like you said, a vulnerability, they associate that with weakness. Anything related to the feminine is associated with weakness. And therefore they're also suffering because, men are whole people too. They want to have all of their parts. So yeah, I'm with you on that. It's just a completely different effect that the patriarchy has had on women and men, obviously.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and so I have to tell you that is later on your book, but one of the statements that I found myself literally out loud screaming yes to is when you put super, super simply, I mean, I highlighted it, it's one of my tab pages, but it said, if we're going to change the world, we're going to have to change the way we think. And I want to repeat that for listeners. Just think about that because right now, I feel like so many people in our world are either apathetic or they're on the angry judgmental path, or they're really almost resigned and feeling hopeless. There's a lot of just disheartened mental energy with what's happening in our world right now and how people are responding to it. And I think there are so many things out there that we certainly cannot control, but I think we all intuitively know and sometimes need a reminder that we can control how we respond, how we react, and then ultimately how we have a greater influence around us. And this is really the heart of the work both you and I do. So listeners, I just want to repeat this statement that if we're going to change the world, we're going to have to change the way we think.
This is really, 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 really core to everything that people need to hear right now, like you said. And I'll even drill it down into a specific example, which is yesterday I had one of my students that's in the Spiral Up course. She's going through a breakup. She's going through a loss of a job. I think it's a tough time for her. And she asked me for some advice. And I basically said to her, be careful of the meaning that you're making up about what happened. There is what happened, and then there's what you're making up about it. Be disciplined to make up something that is going to be in your favor, not something that's going to work against you, because we are meaning-making machines. So speaking of your thoughts, that's the number one thing is like we are constantly making up meaning about what happens to us. And often it's not in our favor at all. And it's really up to us to be the author of that.
Absolutely. There's a saying that I learned once upon a time that says it's foolish to lose in your own fantasies. because we're making it up anyway. So I love that you're doing that, because we talk about that too. It's like, sometimes if we're doing a class, we'll have like this slide, and we'll have these two circles, and it'll say, over here's what happened, right? And over here's the story what happened, that is usually much bigger and much more dramatic, and it's added on. It's like the game of telephone. And you're right. That's how we as human beings make sense of our experiences, is to create a narrative and create a story. I mean, you go back to our ancestors, who sat around campfires and told stories, and it's how we're designed as a species. But to your point, we don't think we're making up a story. We think it's fact. We think because we have this thought or this narrative runs through our head, it must be true, rather than, no, it is literally an interpretation or a story. And I have an ability to go fact check that story and find out, is it actually true? Is part of it true? Is it all bullshit? And we don't fact check our stories. We just run with them as if it's true. But there is something about even calling it a story, because I think when we say, okay, I'm telling myself a story, or be careful of the meaning I'm adding, however you want to label it, it suddenly reminds us, oh, wait, I'm doing that. I have control, versus I'm subject to it and it's controlling me. And there's something to be said, and you talk about this in your book, about naming it. I think I had a podcast guest that talked about like speaking your ugly out loud. But like when we name something and acknowledge it for what it is, it doesn't have the power over us, or we get to get back in the driver's seat. Is that fair to say?
For sure. That's one way to separate from it and witness it, is to name it. And then you're already separated from it. I think David White said something like, you can't live in a house that you haven't found the language to. So it's very important to be able to separate enough from it to do it. But I would say the thing about story that I was just thinking about when you were saying that is, you're right. We don't think we're making up a story, like a fabrication about something. But I love that you said find evidence, because what I recommend to people is that they do some damage to their beliefs, like that they try to prove the opposite of it. Because if you do, then you start to see, oh, the opposite of this could be true in so many cases. Yet seem very committed to having it be this way. That's making me sad, So it's like being a really good lawyer and saying, I'm going to question this belief that I have that's causing me suffering. I'm going to question it, and I'm going to see what else could be true about this. And I feel like there's so much goodness that can come out of that, to just like really do damage to it.
I love that you put that very simply and practically. And actually, I will tell you that it's a key practice in the upgrade journey that we bring leaders on through the specific coaching we use from Bob Keegan and Lisa Leahy, called Immunity to Change. And really, as part of it, once you identify what that faulty meaning making system is, where did it come from? We go through a process of what makes it worse, what makes it better. So we're really getting to know kind of that psychological immune system and how we're inadvertently working against ourselves. You do start then literally, you talk about collecting that opposing data. You start creating opportunities where, how could I go collect data that might poke holes in this? For example, a common one, like when people have a warped value proposition, you go back to the A's, that my value is attached to my accolades and my achievements and those types of things. Well, if you have at some level that you don't have value unless you're achieving, I used to have that, right? Or that it comes from your accomplishments, or your value comes from being productive. Well, a really simple way that so many people find cringy, but it's so easy to start to poke holes in that, is go ask some people, what do you value about me? And just shut up and listen.
Yeah. Wow, that is a great tip. I'd say in so many cases, you can find out what your purpose is by asking people what they see consistently of how you bring value. Yeah. And the other thing is to start to look for evidence of the opposite of the thing that you say about yourself. Like really start to look, one thing we ask people to do is create a kudos list, like create a repository for all of the accolades that they've ever gotten, so that when they forget about it, that they have this great little file they can refer to. But also, if you start collecting evidence to the opposite of the belief that's hurting you, you will do damage to it. And that's what you want to do.
Yeah. I have a actual physical file of warm fuzzies, like when people send me thank you notes. And I have a file, a subfolder in my email that I call warm fuzzies. And just like you're talking about, when I'm having a day where my head trash is getting the best of me and I'm beating myself up or whatever, I go and look, oh, okay, I don't suck. Okay, thank you for that reminder. It
That's
makes a
so
difference.
funny.
It really
It's good. You're very evolved. Your work sounds amazing too. It's very human centered.
Yeah. Well, I would say my caveat is, and this is what I say to everybody, is I've done a boatload. I mean, a boatload of work on myself, and it's ongoing. So I would say if anyone listening thinks that they're done and you've arrived, like newsflash, no, no, no. And a lot of the tools that we use, just probably similar to you, a lot of the tools that we use with our clients selfishly, like, I'm like, yay, it's a reminder for me. And I use them for myself because when my humanity gets the best of me, when I'm like down spiraling, probably, I'm like, whew, how do I get right? How do I reset? And so I think that's so important because people will think, oh, you're evolved or oh, no, it's been years and it's ongoing work and it's, oh crap, here I go again. What's my lesson learned? How do I reset? I feel like that's our ongoing journey. Like, hopefully you won't go back to square one. Like if you upgrade, I call it like, think about, like, when your computer or your phone is completely malfunctioning, and the only way to get it back to where it needs to be is you have to restore to factory settings and then start upgrading again. Like, that happens sometimes, right? We, like, all of a sudden restore to factory settings, but we have the tools where we can quickly kinda, I don't know, upgrade again.
It's more like a chiropractic adjustment at this point, I'd say. It's like not an overhaul. We both done tons and tons of work on ourselves for 40 years or whatever. And I'm like you, I had to find a profession that would allow me to continue to do all this because I am fascinated by human nature and how it works and transformation. And I was always going to learn and, immerse myself in things that would help me grow. So then eventually you get enough wisdom that you can pass it along to somebody
Yeah,
else.
yeah. Well, and so with that, I'm gonna read another passage from your book because I want listeners to just like, yeah. So again, I highlighted so many, but this was one I was like, oh, it just resonated. So you say rising to power in yourself means coming into possession of your own gifts so that you can fulfill your potential and live your soul's purpose. It means doing the inner work that's needed to tap into the radiant and unlimited power you already hold. And when you do, nobody can take it away from you and nothing can stop you. So I just want people to take that in for a second because this speaks to that inner work. Like, yeah, you might have a blip. Yep, you might have a setback. But man, like, watch out, step into your boldness. No one's taking it away from you, but you got to do that upgrade work.
Right. And also, I would just say someone might hear that and think, well, I don't know what my purpose is, or I don't know what my gifts are. And that's okay. All you need is your curiosity. What is it that you're curious about? Even the smallest thing. If you can follow the curiosity, you'll eventually find your gifts and you'll find your purpose. Don't lay it on yourself that you're somehow missing something if you haven't figured out your purpose yet.
Well, and so with that, so let's go back to the spiraling up because you alluded to this in the beginning, which is really about how do we transition from that life by default to an inspired life. And you talk specifically about the three critical turnings of that spiral. Can you just talk a little bit more about what they are?
Yes. The first one is, I'm not sure what I called it in there, but it's the one where I said it's like life up by default, and we're really finding ourselves in situations where you can pretty much hear yourself say a story that's similar to what you've said before, but they're different people and characters in the story. And it's you as a victim. You're basically feeling like a victim. And either your job is doing it to you, your boss is doing it to you, your neighbors are doing it to you, somehow your partner's doing it to you. There's a victim mentality. That is a powerless position to be in. You have no power. So you want to pop yourself out of that victim thing and into the second loop. And the second loop is where the 5 co-creative powers live. So the second loop is where you activate your agency. You realize that it's going to be all about you taking responsibility for your life experience, and not in a blaming way, but in a way that you can actually change things. And the 5 co-creative powers are access to the things that we each have inside of us, innate capacities that we've pretty much used unconsciously until we realize how important they are. We've touched on some of them. The first one, though, is energy. Energy, it's the most important commodity that we have is our energy. And to learn how to summon our energy and recharge our energy and how to be intentional about the energy that we're sending out to people. Because what people pick up about you is your energy. How you leave people, it's how you make people feel that they remember.
Yeah, it's like, are you an energy giver or an energy depleter or energy vampire, so to speak? Yeah.
Yeah. No, you don't want to be that. So really learning about energy and starting to observe people and their energy, like when someone walks into a room, is that person lit up? Is that person dragging somebody down? And what is it like when you see somebody who's radiant? And what is happening there? There's this one doctor that works in this cutting edge progressive place, and she walks into a room and I'm literally stunned by her. Her energy is so bright. And people read that. So energy, you can have an effect on life just with your energy. The next one is mind. And there's so much to mind, obviously, from really learning how to witness your thoughts, not be at effect of your thoughts. There's a thing called the 5 R's, which is releasing a thought that's stubborn and that's pernicious and that's not helping you. There's lots of tools in there about how to not be at the mercy of your mind, and most of us are, walking around following what the mind is telling us to do. And that keeps us on automatic. So how do you get out of that? The third one, and often not talked about a lot in organizations, is feelings. And how feelings, they're not the truth, but they're the doorway to the truth. And they can really give you a lot of insight about what you care about, what your mission is, what your values are. All those things, your feelings are great doorways to show you that.
Oh, I want to pause on that. I want to double down on the feeling one for a second, because I'm a huge fan of like Mark Brackett's Permission to Feel work. And, when Brene Brown came out with her Atlas of the Heart, and just really starting to recognize how critical emotional literacy is. And it's part of emotional intelligence, but we don't teach people how to have the right language. We don't make it safe for people to feel like we have toxic positivity and silver line stuff rather than sit with them and say, this sucks and I'm here with you. And we have empathy misses and all of those things. But you said something that struck me that I think is so important, is that we don't tend to want to go to feelings because we're uncomfortable with them. We don't know how to deal with them. Most of us have not been taught how to deal with them. But I love that you said it's an awareness tool. And we have this tool we use called the frame, that like how we see something influences how we feel, what we do in our results. And feeling, we always say that feelings by themselves, we don't want to act off of them because they can be misguided. But feelings really are that critical self-awareness tool, particularly when we're having an unsettling feeling. It can be for positive too, but where we get hijacked is usually those unsettling feelings where we go, okay, I'm feeling this. Let me go back to 2 things. First of all, what is a core need that I have that maybe isn't being expressed or isn't being identified? Because usually that feeling is a result of a need not being met. And have a conversation around the needs, not the feelings. Because if you and I are having a conversation and I'm like, Wendy, I feel this. And then you say, well, Rosie, I feel this. All we're doing is vomiting on each other that you've whatever. And then it's a blame, you've made me feel, versus I feel this and I realize I have this need. Let's have a conversation about what I'm needing and what you're needing, and how can we find that win-win? And then the flip side is also, what is the story I'm telling myself that is leading to that feeling? Is that kind of how when you talk about it, is that how you use it, or how do you use it from a self-awareness standpoint?
There's a lot of pieces to this, but I want to first bounce off of what you said because I love that. Are you familiar with nonviolent communication? It kind of comes out of what you're saying, is that when you learn how to make an observation and then say what your feeling is and then say what your need is underneath, it's just like what you said. Whenever you're having an unsettling feeling, usually it's about a need that hasn't been identified and met. And you can often meet that need yourself. So it's not always like somebody else has to meet it. But that's really, really, really a good way of learning about your feelings. And we don't do that. That isn't in the book, but it's in the courses that I lead. What I would say about the feelings is that, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So I was at a conference once. I was speaking in a smaller venue, and Hillary Clinton was speaking and Brene Brown was speaking. They were the keynotes. And it was really funny because Brene was saying basically be vulnerable. She was saying, be vulnerable, that be awkward, lean into the awkward, all that. And Hillary was saying be Teflon. And it was completely opposite. I was like, what are people going to take away from this? It's like be vulnerable, be Teflon. Because Hillary was saying, you've got to have a hard shell and, to get through everything she's been through. And so I had to think through myself, like, what is really true about that? And I'd say that you should be selectively vulnerable, that you should be vulnerable with people that you have trust with. You don't just open up and be vulnerable to everybody, right? And there is some value in having your Teflon on. Sometimes you have to have that on too. So I guess it depends on the moment. And that's what I finally reached as an understanding. But
Well, I think that is really an important point, and it's interesting you say that because I think I trained with Brene Brown, so I'm one of her Dare to Lead facilitators, and one of the things we talk about is, vulnerability and trust are like a dance; they go hand in hand. So she's very clear that vulnerability is not just simply like sharing. Like if you're just oversharing or sharing without boundaries, that's not vulnerability. But it's really about, is our heart closed off? Are we tapping out of cringy conversations? Are we tapping out when things get tough versus staying in there? But to your point, we may have learned that there are certain places that it's not okay. She uses the armoring. And so like she tells a great story that I think is really relevant. So, they do a lot of work, pro bono work in schools. And so there's a lot of facilitators that are trained in her work that use this in classrooms. And one teacher in particular would tell a story about working with kids in a really, really difficult district, right? A lot of poverty, a lot of crime. These kids come from really challenging households. Like it's rough. And one of the rituals that they have is, you imagine these little kids coming in with their backpacks and, they got their cubbies, they got their hooks. When they come in for the day, they have a ritual where when they take their coats and their backpacks off, they take off their invisible armor and hang it up and say, for the 8 hours you're here, you don't have to have that armor on. This is a safe space. Because if you're constantly in that armored state, it's that high alert nervous system that isn't helpful. But then they're very cognizant that when they go back out into their surroundings, it's not safe for them to be vulnerable. And so they put back on their invisible armor to go be safe in their environment. And so I think that that's when we talk about, vulnerability and we talk about courage building, ideally at work, we should not have to be ready for battle. Right? It's not always the case, but that's where psychological safety and stuff comes in. And when, like you said, Hillary was talking about Teflon, I've been using that example a lot, but it's more about not like the armor, but it's when I'm working with our clients, you got to be clear about whose opinions matter and where are you going to be like Teflon in that you let it bounce off and don't take it in. And it doesn't mean that you're oblivious and you don't pay attention to the impact you have. But if you know this person over there is hijacked and this person behaves in a certain way, it's not about you. Why are you absorbing it and letting it mean something about you that it shouldn't, or have it ding your value proposition or have it question yourself? So I refer to the Teflon as bouncing some of that crap and that head trash off of you rather than, letting it being like a magnet or being like whatever would attach. So that's how I refer. So when you were saying the Teflon, I'm like, well, yeah, sometimes you do have to be like, you know what? The trolls on the internet, Teflon, right? People who want to have an opinion that don't know you, Teflon. People who know you and matter, when they have tough feedback, when they have things to say, yeah, you take it in, even if it hurts, because they matter and they know you. So anyway, that's the way that I look at it from like at the Teflon standpoint.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you were Dare to Lead. That's amazing. Very cool. I kind of want to take a left turn here, if that's okay. I feel like there's an important thing to talk about, which is how it is for women as opposed to men in high-tech environments and corporations. Women are less likely to be listened to and believed. They're more likely to be asked to evidence their credentials. They're more likely to be interrupted. They're more likely to have their tone policed. So when you talk about psychological safety, in a lot of cases in meetings, this is the environment that women, when it's a male-dominated environment, that women are in. It's not because men are bad or wrong. It's because they've been enculturated to be in a competitive environment and women have been enculturated to take turns and to be polite. So there's this stuff that goes on that I feel like is important to state because women need to have some tools. First of all, we need to train the men to do better, to make room for us, to make room and to notice the bias that goes on, both in hiring and in getting promotions and making it, like you say, from the messy middle out of where people have the broken rung and they're not making it up to the leadership positions. So there's two-way street here. We have to empower the women, but more so, we have to help the men be better allies so they can help change the structures and the systems that are preventing women from getting a fair shake. So it made me think of that when we were talking about feelings, because some of the stuff that we work on with the men is really about them starting to, yes, own their feelings, but also not shy away from feelings with women. Because when they feel like they sense there's like an emotional conversation coming, which they could interpret as anything coming their way that has a woman behind it, they tend to not want to have it, or not close the door behind you or not go on business trips anymore. A lot of that since Me Too, that's been the backlash. So I just want to bring that to the forefront of the importance of what we're trying to do with men, teaching them both how to enter into those kinds of conversations. And we do the NVC with them. We teach them that, which is really great. But also to give women the tools to be able to just have a lot of agency and speak up.
I think that's so important. And I love that you're doing that work and teaching what does it mean to be an ally and not feel shame about the privilege that they have. And you have some great stuff in the book about that, but to really, how do you lean into that? And it is fascinating because I will say that, like even with our consultant team, there's one client we're working with predominantly, male, and they're great, but I'm like, nope, there's a lot of still chauvinism and patriarchy and whatnot. And when we were dividing up the leadership team, he was going to coach some, I was going to coach some, and there were some, I'm like, you're taking this person. He goes, why? I go, because that person's a complete chauvinist and isn't going to listen to me. And he looked at me like, and I'm like, this isn't your world. You don't hear the microaggressions and the comments that or we say things like, you guys, you're not coming from malicious intent. But when you refer to the gals or the ladies in the office, and I don't care if everyone that works in the office versus out in the warehouse happens to be female, it's demeaning and it's putting them on a less than. Like there's just things that they think are terms of endearment. And when you bring it up and not in a shaming way, they're like, oh, we don't mean it. I get it. But like you need to hear from someone who is a female. These things aren't helping, right? And aren't helping you attract and retain younger females because they see this and are like, WTF, no thank you. And so I think it's important that we can bring awareness in a non-blaming and shaming way and help them understand and believe our experiences. And just like you and I are not women of color, I can't pretend, but I have dear friends that I know if she raises her voice, she has to be really careful because she's labeled even worse than I am. And so there's very, very real realities that we don't want to deal with or talk about, but that we have to if we're going to have environments that are safe for people to spiral up and be their best selves, if we're going to have environments that are courageous, and if we're going to move through this messy, disruptive world, we can't do it when people feel like they have to be silenced.
Right. And so some of those things are that we should say is 37% of women leaders had a coworker take credit for their idea and were twice as likely to be mistaken for someone more junior. That happens. Second thing is likability catch-22. You've heard of that. People are either dinged for being too nice and incompetent, or if they're warm, or if they're competent, they're cold. So they can't win either way. In one study of performance reviews, 68% of women received negative feedback on their assertiveness. Only 1% of men have ever gotten that. So what can we do? We can debunk the myth that if women are asking questions, that they're trying to slow down a process. No, women see the connection between things. And they often see what happened before and the relationship that it has to the future. So we can gain a lot from listening to them and answering those questions. If a woman is given an admin task, ask her if she's okay with that. Don't just assume that she should do the party organizing or whatever. Another one is to always showcase the project owner, even if they're not present. And then don't mansplain. Before you start to explain something to a woman, ask yourself, does this woman know as much as me about this subject? Or are they asking for a deeper background before I launch into this? So just those are just some of the things that we try to bring to the surface.
I love all that, and I think it's so important. Again, it brings it off of shame and blame into practical, what can we do and what can we be aware of? So I want to circle back, no pun intended, but we talked about the first 3 co-creative powers to spiral up. So the third was feeling. So what are 4 and 5?
Thank you. Okay, so the fourth one is speech. It's the co-creative power of speech, and there's so much to speech, whether it's to articulate your value, whether it's how to make a powerful request, how to make a decline, how to make a counteroffer, just having your voice, in the room, speaking truth to power, all of the things that we sometimes edit ourselves and we hold back, or we rework an email for a half an hour before we send it. We want to take the muzzle off, give ourselves permission to just speak and say what we want to say, get our voice in the room. So that's really, really important. There's a study that's been done in a meeting in any social situation where if one person says something and they think to themselves, I'm going to take a risk, and they say something that's like against the popular notion in the room, and that, let's say, someone else like rolls their eyes, that person will say, I'm never going to say that again. I'm never going to share again. That one person has just like quelched this person. But if one person gives them a belonging cue, which is like a nod, I agree, something like that, the whole system can change. And that takes me to another point about the belonging cue, because there's so much more important than you think when you hear about this. In the way the brain works, the amygdala, it's a fight or flight vigilance machine. It's constantly scanning the environment for what might go wrong. Am I going to survive? And what they've found, this was in Brian Coyle's book, The Culture Code. You know that one, right? Do you remember what he writes about? This always blew my mind when I saw it, is that when we sense a threat, it pulls an alarm cord that's sending fight or flight stimulant to us. But also, it plays a role in building social connections. So when you receive a belonging cue, which, like I said, is like a nod or any kind of affirmation, the amygdala switches roles and starts to use its immense unconscious neural horsepower to build and sustain social contacts. So we start tracking where our friends are and who they are and what they're up to and all of that. And, that is the opposite of fight or flight. It's like tend and befriend, that whole other thing women can do. So I love that the amygdala is getting a rebrand.
Yeah. I love that. Well, yeah, and it's even, the that fight or flight stress response and the cortisol and stuff that goes with it. It reminds me of a dear friend and colleague, Jen Marr. She does a lot of work with human care and connection, and talks about how oxytocin, which is the belonging and the love, is actually the antidote for the cortisol. And so when we give belonging cues, when we actually engage in meaningful care and connection, not this, hey, let me know if I can do anything, but we really know the skills of how to show human care and connection, it actually is the antidote to that as well. So
I love that. You're so knowledgeable. So let me finish with the co-creative power of speech. Basically, when we take full advantage of this power, we speak authentically, we make powerful asks, we say no when appropriate, and we raise ourselves and others and situations to the next level, like you said, to the upgrade level. The last one is the co-creative power of action. And all of the co-creative powers build on each other. And you can really start anywhere and they all telegraph to each other. But action is really like our souls made a commitment when we came into this life. We made a commitment to fulfill on something that was unique to our soul. And I think that you discover that when you take a bit of a risk. You find it only when you take a bit of a risk, and in my life, I've taken a number of risks. One of them was, adopting my sister's son when he was 10 and raising him when I didn't know what the heck, how to do that, But I also found that doing things that I didn't think I knew how to do really gives me the energy to fulfill it. And so I recommend that to people. And I talk a lot about how important it is to have a stand for your life that is bigger than you, that isn't about your life. And it will lift you up out of pettiness. It will get you to do the things that you think that you don't want to do or that you really don't feel like doing. And a stand is something that's never accomplished in your lifetime, but it's something like it could be for the equality of children. It could be for just anything for women. It could be for the women coming up behind you. It could be for racial equity. It could be for whatever it is for you. You know what it is because you care about that thing. And it's really important to find that thing and have your life include that.
I love that. Well, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier, the growth doesn't happen in our comfort zone. So we can shift our mindset and we can challenge our stories and we can look at feeling and we can, in our voice. But if we don't fundamentally at some level get into action, the change isn't going to happen. But we do have to do all that inner upgrade work. So I love that you say they build on each other because so often we try to, this is coming out, beginning of a new year. So we could talk about the New Year's resolution approach to change, or I'm just going to be like Nike, I'm just going to do it. But you're not going to get into action and have that action stick if it's not built on a foundation that can sustain it. And so I think so often that's why most of change efforts fail individually and collectively at the organizational level is because we're taking that action-oriented approach, but we haven't done the inner upgrade. So I love your steps. I love your co-created powers. I love the spiraling up process. I could talk to you for hours, but I want to shift gears to wrap this up for today. And we're gonna have to have you back again. But in speaking of that upgrading and that mindset, one of the things that I think I'm obsessed with is normalizing the messiness of being human and that we all have that head trash, so to speak. We all, no matter how evolved we are, no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, that little voice gets in our way. And so what I would love for you to share, Wendy, is what is a self-limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move through or move beyond it or spiral up from it in your case so you can still show up as a leader in your life?
That's a good one. I don't have a hard time finding that, partly because I've been sick this week and I feel like weaker. I've sort of been feeling like, oh my God, I'm getting old, and the I'm old conversation. I told myself at the beginning of this year, I'm not going to say that anymore. It's definitely a put down because our culture is so youth oriented that it's easy to look at yourself and go, well, I used to be able to do this, or I used to, whatever. So the way that I get through it, one of the ways, this is kind of a funny way, but I have a lot of young women that are in my, they're either in my coaching groups or whatever. And I know that they need someone to look up to and have as a role model for when they get older. And so when I think of that, it shifts me. So I think, well, I can be that for them. I can be an inspiration for them. This is what 70 looks like, and I can totally model that for them. So that's what I do with that one.
I love that. I love that. Well, as someone who, turned 50, I love it. I love it because I find myself going, oh my God, this sucks. Nope, nope, nope. So there we go.
It's so easy to get into that rap. And I literally just wrote down, like in my little notes to myself, like, you need to look at how beautiful getting older is and start to pay attention to that and really, honor it. What's the alternative, girl?
Right. Yeah. I love that. I love that. All right. Are you ready for quick questions?
Sure.
Okay. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is
The only way to live.
makes my heart sing. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
I'm trying to think if that ever happens because when the opening happens, I'm always excited. I'm very much a responder to invitation. If I don't feel like it, sometimes I just don't, Sometimes I don't. Like this week, I've been like, okay, I'm just going to lay down now.
Your body needed to be taken care of. That's 100%. Yes. Okay. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
They would be surprised to know, well, A, that I had a kidney transplant 34 years ago, and B, that I just finished singing backup vocals in a Bob Seger tribute band.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I love that. All right. What's your go-to song?
Oh, wow. Bring Your Friends. Do you know what song that is?
No, I'm like a song junkie, but I don't know if I know that one. I'm gonna have to look it up.
I have a lot of songs, that I sing and stuff. So, but Bring Your Friends is hilarious, and you need to definitely get that song. Yeah, I wish I could play it for you, but it's
I'm gonna go to Spotify when we're done here and go check it out. So I love it. I
so
love it.
funny.
All right, I'm gonna go check it out. What is something you can't live without?
My cats.
What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
Well, I would say I'll change my last answer to like what I can't live without would be like some kind of swimming or body movement. I really like dance, all those things that make you feel good. And then I would say the answer is cats. Makes me feel good for this one.
I love it. Okay. Awesome. We can flip-flop them. That's all right. And then what are you grateful for right now?
Oh, I'm really grateful for you. I as you've been sharing and talking to me, I have had the thought many times like, wow, I'd love to do something with you because we're complementary, in what we do, but you're so knowledgeable and so good at what you do. And I just, really admire you. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm an admirer of yours. So the love is mutual and I would love to collaborate. So you heard it here, folks. We're going to figure something out. So, all right. One last question, Wendy. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
Acknowledgement and appreciation. There's a hoarding that goes on in regard to appreciation and acknowledgement in organizations. It's almost like because people haven't gotten enough from themselves, they don't ever do it for other people. It should be what all leaders are fluent in, not just because somebody does something great, but because for people showing up, people need the encouragement and appreciation, and it goes a long way. So if everybody could learn that, it would be really great.
100%. 100%. Well, Wendy, it has been such a delight. And just thank you for the work that you're doing out in the world to spiral people up and to create allyship and belonging. And just thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This much appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You are a star and you are amazing. And it's been so much fun to talk to you. Thank you for having me.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.